In a time when castles echoed with snores louder than war drums, and kings wore velvet nightcaps with the same pride as their crowns, bedtime was no trivial affair. Monarchs didn't just sleep, they performed sleep, with rituals more dramatic than a Shakespearean soliloquy, and beds so grand they had their own zip codes. Some snored like thunder, others dreamt of tax reforms, and one queen allegedly banished a pillow for insubordination. Their sleep was sacred, scandalous, and occasionally scented with goat milk. So, if you're ready to drift off into a world of royal absurdity, grab your blanket, silence your scrolls, and prepare to be lulled into slumber by the most gloriously boring bedtime tale ever told. Because in the medieval court, even sleep had a crown. And hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which kingdom you're watching from. Are you tuning in from the land of insomnia or the realm of just one more chapter? Either way, your royal bedtime awaits. King Henry III of England had a bed so enormous it was once mistaken for a banquet table by a visiting French ambassador. Crafted from oak, gilt, and a healthy dose of royal ego, the bed was said to groan louder than the king himself after a third helping of roasted boar. The mattress, stuffed with goose feathers, horsehair, and, according to one disgruntled servant, the crushed hopes of unpaid peasants. It was so lumpy that Henry often woke up feeling like he had slept on a pile of disgruntled hedgehogs. Every night, the king would ascend his bed like a knight preparing for battle. He wore a velvet nightcap, embroidered with tiny crowns, a woolen robe that dragged behind him like a parade float, and slippers shaped like miniature castles. His bedtime procession included a goblet of warm mead for digestion and delusion, a reading of psalms until someone snored, a foot massage by Reginald, the royal thumb technician, whose hands were insured by the crown. Queen Eleanor, meanwhile, had her own bed, smaller, firmer, and located precisely 12 feet away, separated by a tapestry depicting a unicorn sneezing. She believed in dream separation, a medieval theory that sleeping too close to one's spouse could result in shared nightmares, especially about tax audits. The royal couple practiced segmented sleep, a common medieval habit where people slept in two phases. After first sleep, they'd wake around midnight, wander the halls, complain about the draft, and eat leftover pigeon pie. Then came second sleep, which was often interrupted by Henry R.S. snoring, described by one monk as a thunderstorm trapped in a wine barrel. Despite the grandeur, sleep was elusive. The castle was cold, the bed was loud, and the king once mistook a chambermaid for a ghost and knighted her out of fear. And so, as you lie in your own bed, hopefully less haunted and more hygienic, remember that even kings struggled to get a good night's sleep. Their bedtime was a royal mess, and their dreams, mostly about taxes, turnips, and the occasional talking goose. Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine was many things: duchess, crusader, political mastermind, and an absolute tyrant when it came to bedtime pillows. Her Majesty required exactly 12 pillows to sleep, not 11, not 13, 12. Each had a specific purpose and a name embroidered in gold thread. There was Sir Fluffington, neck support; Lady Downsworth, elbow rest; Baron Puffalo, for dramatic sighing; and a particularly lumpy one named Gerald, who was only kept around for sentimental reasons. Every evening, the royal pillowmaster, a position created solely for this purpose, would arrange the pillows in a sacred configuration known as the Feathered Fortress. Woe unto the servant who dared misplace Gerald. One unfortunate footman once sat on him by accident and was reassigned to moat duty for a fortnight. The Queen's husband, King Henry II, found the whole affair baffling. His own sleep setup consisted of one pillow, a wool blanket, and a firm belief that comfort was for the weak. He often joked that Eleanor's bed looked like a siege tower made of fluff. But Eleanor was unbothered. She believed that proper pillow alignment was the key to lucid dreaming and political clarity. A well-supported neck, she once declared, leads to well-supported treaties. The pillow war escalated one fateful night when the Queen discovered that Gerald had been replaced with a counterfeit, an imposter pillow filled with duck feathers instead of goose. Outraged, she summoned the entire bedchamber staff for interrogation. The culprit? A new maid who thought Gerald was just a nickname for the lumpy one. The maid was forgiven, eventually, but Gerald was never the same. He developed a permanent dent and was retired to the Royal Linen Archives, where he remains to this day, honored with a plaque that reads, "He supported a queen," literally. If you think waking up at 2 a.m. for a snack is a modern indulgence, think again. Medieval kings and queens practically invented the midnight munchies. In the Middle Ages, sleep wasn't one long stretch of unconsciousness. It came in 2 acts, first sleep and second sleep. After a few hours of slumber, people would wake up in the middle of the night, stretch, pray, gossip, or, if you were royalty, summon a roast chicken and a lute player. King Edward VI of England was a devout practitioner of this segmented sleep. After his first sleep, he'd rise, don a fur-lined robe, and shuffle down the corridor like a sleepy bear in search of honey. His destination? The royal nibbling nook, a small chamber stocked with pies, cheeses, and a suspiciously large number of pickled eels. Queen Margaret of Scotland, on the other hand, used her midnight wake-up for more refined pursuits. She'd sip warm milk infused with lavender, write passive-aggressive notes to rival queens, and occasionally recite poetry to her cat, Sir Whiskerford. The royal kitchens were always on standby. Cooks dreaded the sound of the midnight bell. It meant someone wanted just a little something, which usually turned into a 5-course feast. One chef reportedly invented the world's first bedside charcuterie board, complete with fig jam and passive resentment. But the real star of second sleep was the dream journal. Monarchs believed that dreams between first and second sleep were prophetic. King Louis IX once dreamt of a talking turnip that warned him about a tax revolt. He raised the grain levy the next day. The revolt happened anyway. The turnip was never seen again. So, if you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night, craving cheese and contemplating your destiny, don't worry. You're just sleeping like royalty. Long before bubble baths and bath bombs, medieval monarchs took bathing very seriously, especially before bedtime. Not because they liked being clean, heavens no, but because they believed a good soak could ward off demons, improve dreams, and prevent one's soul from escaping through the armpits. King Charles VI of France was a particularly enthusiastic bather. He insisted on a nightly ritual involving a copper tub filled with rosewater and regret, a choir of monks humming lullabies in Latin, a royal astrologer stirring the bath with a silver ladle while whispering, "Sleep well, my liege, and don't dream of frogs again." The king believed that bathing before bed softened the humors, which was medieval speak for made you less cranky and less likely to yell at the tapestry. His bath chamber was so elaborate it had its own moat, and once hosted a diplomatic meeting between two ducks and a confused ambassador. Queen Isabella of Castile, on the other hand, preferred dry bathing, a medieval method involving powders, perfumes, and a firm belief that water was suspicious. She would sit in a velvet chair while servants dusted her with crushed lavender and muttered prayers to Saint Hygiene. Bathing was also political. A clean monarch was seen as divinely favored, while a smelly one was assumed to be cursed or French. One chronicler wrote that King Edward II smelled like a damp scroll, which may explain why he was unpopular at parties. Of course, not all royal baths went smoothly. King Richard II once fell asleep in his tub and woke up convinced he'd been reborn as a carp. He spent the rest of the week refusing to wear shoes and demanding breadcrumbs. So, tonight, simply dream of one. Remember that medieval kings and queens bathed not just for cleanliness, but for cosmic protection, political clout, and the occasional aquatic identity crisis. It was a quiet night in the castle of Queen Isabella of France, until the cheese went missing. Not just any cheese. This was the Queen's sacred midnight wheel of brie, aged precisely 17 months, and blessed by a bishop with a mild dairy allergy. It was kept under a silver dome beside her bed, guarded by a footman named Claude, whose only job was to whisper, "Your Majesty, the cheese is safe," every half hour. But on this fateful night, the dome was empty. The cheese had vanished, and in its place, a single mouse turd. Queen Isabella screamed. Claude fainted. The royal cat, Sir Meowbert, looked suspiciously innocent. A full investigation was launched. The Royal Rodent Inquiry Committee, RRIC, was summoned. They wore tiny monocles and carried scrolls labeled Cheese Crimes, Volume 4. After 3 hours of intense sniffing and one unfortunate incident involving a trap and a bishop's toe, the culprit was found. A mouse named Bertrand, known in the castle as the Shadow of the Pantry. Bertrand had a reputation. He once stole a fig from the Archbishop's breakfast and left behind a note that read, "Thanks, needed fiber." He was wanted in 3 kingdoms and had a bounty of 2 wheels of cheddar on his tiny head. Queen Isabella was livid. She declared war not on England, not on rebellious nobles, but on Bertrand. A decree was issued. Let it be known that any mouse found within 50 paces of my brie shall be banished to the moat. The moat, unfortunately, was already full of exiled frogs. Bertrand was never caught. Some say he escaped on a goose. Others claim he became a cheese merchant in Bruges. But his legend lived on, and Queen Isabella never slept without a mousetrap under her pillow again. In the grand tradition of medieval over-engineering, royal beds weren't just places to sleep. They were architectural statements, and nothing said, "I am important," and mildly paranoid, like a bed canopy tall enough to host a falcon. King Ferdinand of Aragon had a canopy so vast, it required scaffolding to clean. It was made of imported silk, embroidered with scenes of victorious battles, celestial visions, and one oddly detailed image of a turnip wearing a crown. The purpose? To keep bugs, bats, and bad dreams at bay. But the real menace wasn't supernatural. It was cobwebs. Despite the best efforts of the Royal Dusting Guild, a team of 4 elderly men With feather dusters and existential dread, cobwebs always returned. Queen Isabella once woke up with a spider dangling from her tiara and declared war on all eight-legged insurgents. A royal edict was issued. No spider shall trespass upon the sacred sleep of the crown. The spiders ignored it. Some monarchs embraced the cobwebs. King Louis XV of France believed they were good luck and refused to have them removed. He claimed they filtered nightmares like divine cheesecloth. His bed canopy looked like a haunted attic, and his dreams often featured talking goats and existential debates with his own crown. Others took drastic measures. Queen Blanche of Navarre installed a miniature moat around her bed, filled with lavender oil and tiny floating candles. It didn't stop the spiders, but it did make her room smell like a romantic apothecary. The canopy also served as a gossip barrier. Servants would whisper beneath it, thinking the fabric absorbed secrets. It didn't. One scandalous rumor about the Duke of Burgundy's bedtime snacking habits spread faster than the cobwebs themselves. Before alarm clocks, snooze buttons, or passive-aggressive calendar reminders, medieval monarchs relied on nature's most punctual creature, the rooster. And not just any rooster. Royal roosters were bred for volume, flair, and a dramatic sense of timing. King Wenceslaus of Bohemia had a prized rooster named Sir Cluckles, who was trained to crow precisely at dawn, or so the royal rooster wrangler claimed. In reality, Sir Cluckles had a flair for improvisation. He crowed at midnight during sermons and once during a royal wedding, causing the bride to faint and the groom to question his life choices. To improve accuracy, the king hired a monk named Brother Benedict to teach Sir Cluckles Latin. The goal? To have the rooster crow Ave Maria instead of the usual barnyard screech. After 6 months of training, Sir Cluckles produced a sound that resembled ah, which was close enough for medieval standards. Queen Matilda of Flanders preferred a gentler wake-up call. She had a team of doves, trained to coo in harmony outside her window. Unfortunately, they were easily distracted by breadcrumbs, and once serenaded the wrong chambermaid, who woke up thinking she'd been chosen by angels. Roosters weren't just alarm clocks. They were status symbols. A particularly loud rooster was considered a sign of divine favor. King Philip II of France once gifted a rooster to the Pope, claiming it could wake the dead and mildly annoy the living. The Pope returned it with a note: "Too effective. Send muffins next time." But not all royal roosters were beloved. Queen Eleanor of Castile had one named Reginald, who crowed with such intensity that it shattered a stained glass window. He was exiled to the countryside, where he became a local legend and part-time weather forecaster. If you think medieval fashion stopped at tunics and chainmail, think again. When it came to bedtime, kings and queens dressed like they were attending a royal pajama gala, hosted by a mildly confused tailor. The centerpiece of any noble's sleepwear? The nightcap, not the drink, though that came later, but the actual hat. These were no ordinary beanies. They were long, floppy, and often trailed behind the wearer like a sleepy serpent. King Edward III's nightcap was so long it required its own valet. It was embroidered with tiny lions, moons, and one suspiciously accurate image of a goose doing yoga. Queen Philippa of Hainault had a collection of over 40 nightcaps, each for a different mood. There was the "I'm feeling regal" cap, purple velvet, gold tassel, the "I'm mildly annoyed" cap, gray wool, no tassel, and the "I just banished someone" cap, black silk, embroidered with tiny lightning bolts. But the true marvel of medieval bedtime fashion was the nose warmer. Yes, you read that correctly. Drafty castles meant cold noses, and cold noses meant cranky monarchs. Enter the nose. Warmer, a tiny pouch of fur or fabric that tied around the head and gently hugged the royal schnoz. Queen Joan of Navarre swore by hers, claiming it helped her dream of warm beaches and fewer political assassinations. King Richard II took it further. He had a full-face sleep mask made of ermine fur, with holes for breathing and a tiny flap for sneezing. It looked like a cross between a masquerade mask and a confused badger. His courtiers were forbidden from laughing. They laughed anyway. Other bedtime accessories included toe mittens for monarchs who feared frostbite and foot goblins, snore mufflers, woolen wraps tied around the jaw to prevent royal thunder, and dream belts, belts worn to keep dreams from escaping. According to one very imaginative bishop, in the medieval world, a king's snore was not just a sound, it was a seismic event. King Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire was known far and wide for his battle snore, a guttural, rolling growl that shook chandeliers and startled livestock in nearby villages. His advisors once mistook it for an incoming siege and launched a full-scale defense. It turned out the king had simply rolled onto his back. To protect the dignity of the crown and the sanity of the court, a new position was created, the Royal Snore Guard, whose duties included standing outside the royal bedchamber with earplugs made of beeswax, reassuring guests that the noise was not, in fact, a dragon, and taking shifts to gently roll the king onto his side using a velvet-tipped pole called the snore staff. Queen Adelaide of Burgundy had her own sonic bedtime legend. Her snore was described by one court poet as a gentle purr followed by the roar of 1,000 lions being tickled. She insisted it was a sign of divine favor. Her husband insisted on sleeping in a separate wing. Some monarchs tried to suppress their snores with medieval remedies, drinking boiled lettuce water, which only made them dream of salads, sleeping with a frog under the pillow, don't ask, and wearing a snore bridle, a leather contraption that looked like a horse harness and felt like a bad decision. But nothing worked. The snore reigned supreme. In fact, King Alfonso X of Castile once used his snore as a military tactic. During a siege, he slept near the castle walls. The enemy mistook the sound for approaching cavalry and fled, and the king awoke, victorious and slightly confused. Long before sleep apps and guided meditations, medieval monarchs had their own bedtime strategy, counting sheep, not metaphorically, literally. Queen Margaret of Denmark took this practice to majestic extremes. Every night, she summoned her royal shepherd, a man named Bjorn, who smelled faintly of wool and existential dread. Bjorn's job? To parade actual sheep past the queen's bedchamber, while softly announcing their number. 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep. This went on until Margaret drifted off, or until Bjorn passed out from boredom. One night, the count reached 4,812, before the queen finally snored. Bjorn was knighted the next morning for services to the realm of unconsciousness. His sword was made of sheepskin. It bent immediately. King Edward I tried a similar method, but got distracted by naming each sheep after a noble. Ah yes, sheep. 47, Duke of Fluffington. A loyal beast. This led to confusion in court When he began issuing decrees to actual sheep, some monarchs preferred artistic sheep. Queen Blanche of France had her sheep dyed pastel colors and arranged in geometric patterns. Her sleep chamber looked like a woolen kaleidoscope. She claimed it helped her dream in rhymes. Others took it further. King Sigismund of Hungary had a mechanical sheep built by his court inventor. It bleated on command and counted itself. Unfortunately, it malfunctioned and began reciting tax codes. The king didn't sleep for a week. Counting sheep became so popular that one monastery developed a sheep psalter, a book of illustrated sheep with numbers and bedtime prayers. It was banned after a monk tried to marry page 37. In the medieval court, dreams weren't just nighttime nonsense. They were celestial memos, delivered straight from heaven, or occasionally from indigestion. King Charles IV of France once dreamt of a talking cabbage that warned him about a betrayal in the court. The next morning, he fired his treasurer and banned cruciferous vegetables. Historians still debate which decision was wiser. Queen Jadwiga of Poland kept a dream interpreter on staff, a man named Brother Lucian, who wore a robe made of feathers and spoke only in riddles. When the queen dreamt of a flying goat, Lucian declared, "The skies are restless, and your cheese budget shall rise." It did. Coincidentally, so did goat theft. Monarchs believed dreams could predict wars, marriages, plagues, and whether their new slippers would be fashionable. King Henry VI of England once dreamt of a fish wearing a crown and immediately declared war on Scotland. The fish was never found. Scotland was unimpressed. To enhance dream clarity, royal sleep rituals included sleeping with a relic under the pillow, usually a saint's toenail or a blessed spoon, drinking dream wine infused with herbs and mild regret, and whispering one's deepest fear to a tapestry before bed. The tapestry never told. Queen Isabella of Castile kept a dream diary, bound in velvet and guarded by a knight named Sir Scribbles. She once recorded a dream about dancing with a bear in a cathedral. The next day, she commissioned a statue of a bear holding a candle. It still stands in Toledo, confusing tourists and theologians alike. Of course, not all dreams were divine. King Louis IX once dreamt he was a turnip. He spent the next week refusing to speak and demanding to be planted in the garden. His advisors gently reminded him he was human. He remained unconvinced. King Philip IV of France had many enemies: rebellious nobles, scheming bishops, and one particularly vindictive wheel of Camembert. It all began on a chilly October night when the king, unable to sleep, requested his usual bedtime snack, a slice of aged Camembert served on a silver platter shaped like a goose. The cheese arrived, as always, with a side of grapes and a warning from the royal physician. "Your Majesty, this cheese has been fermenting since the last eclipse. It may contain omens." Philip scoffed. "Omens are for peasants and astrologers. I am a man of dairy." He ate the cheese. He slept. And then the dreams began. That night, he dreamt of a wheel of cheese chasing him through the halls of Notre Dame, shouting in Latin and demanding back taxes. He awoke screaming, covered in sweat and a faint smell of brie. The royal astrologer was summoned. He examined the cheese rind and declared, "This wheel is cursed, possibly possessed, definitely French." The cheese was exiled to the royal cellar, where it began to mold in mysterious patterns, one resembling the Pope, another resembling a duck wearing spectacles. The king, now terrified, banned all soft cheeses from the palace. Hard cheeses were allowed, but only if they were blessed by a monk and wrapped in garlic. Queen Joan, unimpressed, continued eating cheese in secret. She claimed it gave her vivid dreams of dancing hedgehogs and diplomatic success. Philip accused her of consorting with dairy demons. She responded by commissioning a portrait of herself holding a wheel of Gouda and looking smug. The curse spread. Servants reported nightmares of cheese wheels rolling down staircases, whispering secrets. One knight claimed his armor smelled faintly of Roquefort. The royal chef fled to Burgundy and opened a tavern called the Haunted Dairy. Eventually, the cursed camembert was buried in a lead box beneath the palace. A plaque was placed above it. Here lies the wheel that ruined sleep and diplomacy. Prince Edmund of Lancaster was 7 years old, heir to a kingdom, and absolutely convinced there was a dragon living under his bed. Not a metaphorical dragon, not a bad dream, a real fire-breathing, treasure-hoarding, bedtime-hissing dragon named Sir Sizzlepants. Every night, Edmund refused to sleep until the royal wizard, a man named Cedric, who smelled like burnt toast and wore robes covered in glitter glue, performed the underbed dragon inspection ritual. This involved waving a wand made from a broomstick and a chicken feather, chanting "Draconis be gone us" 3 times, and tossing a handful of breadcrumbs under the bed to distract the beast. Queen Eleanor, Edmund's mother, was patient. She allowed the inspections, the chants, and even the bedtime armor Edmund insisted on wearing, just in case. But King Edward was less amused. "There are no dragons under the bed," he grumbled. "Only dust and political unrest." Still, the legend grew. Servants began leaving tiny shields under Edmund's bed. The royal blacksmith forged a miniature sword named Snugglepiercer. A bard composed a lullaby titled "Sleep, My Brave Dragon Slayer Sleep," which included the line, "If the dragon bites your toes, kick it in the nose." One night, the wizard forgot the ritual. Edmund screamed. The guards rushed in. The jester fainted, and the king, in his nightshirt and fury, declared, "Enough, I shall inspect the bed myself." He knelt, peered under the mattress, and found a roasted chicken leg. No dragon, just leftovers from Edmund's midnight snack. The prince blinked. He must have gone out for dinner. From that night on, Edmund slept soundly. After the ritual, of course. And Sir Sizzlepants became a bedtime legend, whispered about in nurseries and night academies alike. Medieval monarchs didn't just sleep, they ritualized it. Bedtime was a sacred ceremony, governed by superstition, suspicion, and the occasional spoonful of goose fat. King Harold II of England believed that sleeping with his crown nearby would keep his thoughts regal. He placed it on a velvet pillow beside his bed each night, whispering, "Guard my dreams, shiny friend." One morning, he woke up wearing it backwards and declared war on Wales. Historians suspect a prank. Queen Agnes of Navarre followed the rule of 3 yawns. She refused to sleep until she yawned exactly 3 times. If she reached 4, she'd start over. If she only yawned twice, she'd stay awake and knit angry scarves. Her record was 17 scarves in one night. Other royal bedtime superstitions included the sock of silence. A single sock hung on the bedpost to ward off gossiping spirits. The blanket blessing. Blankets sprinkled with holy water and thyme to prevent dream theft. and the pillow flip ritual, flipping the pillow 3 times to summon good dreams, and occasionally a confused chambermaid. King Louis VI of France believed that sleeping with garlic under his pillow would protect him from betrayal. It didn't, but it did keep his bedchamber free of vampires, rodents, and romantic prospects. Queen Isabella of France had a superstition about moonlight. She insisted all windows be covered at night, fearing that moonbeams could whisper secrets to her enemies. One night, a servant forgot to close the curtains. The queen woke up, screamed, "The moon knows too much," and ordered a full lunar investigation. Even bedtime snacks were subject to superstition. Eating apples before sleep was said to invite prophetic dreams. Eating onions invited tears. Eating both invited confusion and indigestion. In the medieval court, nighttime wasn't just for sleep. It was for secrets, and nothing set the mood for royal truth-telling quite like the warm, flickering glow of candlelight. Every fortnight, Queen Beatrice of Aragon hosted a ritual known as the Whispering Flame, held in her private chamber and lit by exactly 13 beeswax candles arranged in a circle, with attendees, including trusted ladies-in-waiting, one mildly suspicious jester, and occasionally a confused monk who thought he was there for a prayer vigil. The rules were simple: 1 confession per candle, no judgment unless it involved fashion crimes, and all secrets must be whispered into a velvet slipper and then sealed with a kiss. Don't ask why. It was tradition. Confessions ranged from the mundane to the mildly scandalous. I stole the Duchess' plum tart and blamed the dog. I think the royal falcon is plotting against me. I've been wearing the same corset for 3 weeks, and it now has its own personality. King Alaric once stumbled into the ritual by accident, mistook it for a seance, and confessed that he'd never learned how to joust. The queen blinked, the jester fainted, and the slipper was quietly burned. Candlelight had a way of loosening tongues, as shadows danced on the walls like gossiping ghosts, and the scent of lavender wax made everyone feel just mysterious enough to overshare. One lady-in-waiting admitted she'd been writing anonymous love poems to the royal stable boy. Another confessed she'd named all the palace pigeons after ex-boyfriends. The queen herself once whispered, "Sometimes I dream of being a baker, just flour, fire, and freedom," and the candles flickered in approval. At the end of each session, the candles were snuffed out one by one, and the room fell into a hush so deep it felt sacred. The secrets were never spoken of again, unless they were really juicy, in which case they were turned into bedtime ballads by the court minstrel. King Leopold IV of Bavaria was a man of peculiar habits. He wore gloves to bathe, believed onions could predict the weather, and, most famously, refused to sleep anywhere but on his horse. Not beside his horse, not near his horse, on his horse. The steed in question was a majestic creature named Sir Napsalot, a dappled gray stallion with the patience of a saint and the posture of a chaise lounge. Every evening, as the castle prepared for slumber, King Leopold would don his velvet nightrobe, climb atop Sir Napsalot, and declare, "Let the royal snooze commence." The horse was fitted with a custom saddlebed hybrid, plush cushions, embroidered blankets, and a tiny canopy that flapped dramatically in the breeze. A footman was assigned to gently rock the horse back and forth, like a medieval rocking chair powered by oats. Why the horse? The king claimed it helped him dream of conquest and carrots. His advisors suspected it was a childhood trauma involving a haunted mattress and a goose named Gerald. Queen Brunhilde, ever supportive, had her own horse bed installed beside his. Hers was a pony named Lady Snoreworthy, who occasionally wandered off mid-nap and once ended up in the royal pantry. The queen awoke, surrounded by pickles, and declared it a spiritual experience. The royal stable was transformed into a bedroom suite. Chandeliers hung from haylofts. Minstrels played lullabies on lute and ney. One bard composed a hit ballad titled Sleepy in the Saddle, which included the line, "He dreams while trotting, snoring while plotting." Of course, not all nights were peaceful. One stormy evening, Sir Napsalot sneezed mid-slumber, launching the king into a haystack and briefly crowning a goat. The goat was knighted out of confusion and retired with honors. Queen Arabella of Wessex was known for her wisdom, her wit, and her unwavering devotion to a stuffed hedgehog named Sir Pricklebottom. Not a real hedgehog, not a magical one, just a slightly lopsided, velvet-stuffed creature with button eyes, a crooked smile, and a tiny crown sewn onto his fuzzy head. He was her bedtime companion, her confidant, and, according to palace gossip, her unofficial advisor on matters of state. Every night, Sir Pricklebottom was placed on a silk pillow beside the queen's bed. A footman was assigned to fluff his quills, which were made of embroidered thread and mild anxiety, and a lady-in-waiting read him a bedtime poem. His favorite was Ode to a Sleepy Turnip. The queen claimed he helped her sleep soundly and dream sweetly. "He absorbs my worries," she once said, "and occasionally whispers solutions in my dreams." The court physician diagnosed this as royal plush projection syndrome. The queen diagnosed the physician as boring. Sir Pricklebottom had a wardrobe, tiny cloaks for winter, a miniature suit of armor for diplomatic nights, and once a scandalous velvet cape for the annual masquerade of moonlight. He was the talk of the ballroom, despite not attending. One night, the queen misplaced him. Panic ensued. The royal hedgehog search party was formed. They searched the gardens, the kitchens, and even interrogated the royal cat, who looked suspicious but refused to comment. Sir Pricklebottom was eventually found in the library, propped against a stack of books titled How to Rule with Sass. After that, he was assigned a bodyguard, Sir Snuggleton, a knight with a soft heart and a firm grip on plush security. The queen's affection for Sir Pricklebottom inspired a trend. Nobles began carrying their own bedtime companions, stuffed owls, embroidered badgers, and one particularly unsettling velvet eel named Maurice. The palace became a zoo of fabric and feelings. King Theobald II of Aquitaine was a wise ruler by day and a wandering mystery by night. Each evening, after his ceremonial goblet of lukewarm beet broth and a lullaby sung by 3 reluctant monks, the king would drift into slumber. But an hour later, he'd rise again, eyes closed, crown slightly askew, and begin his royal sleepwalk. He didn't just pace, he performed. One night, he marched into the throne room, sat on his own lap, and declared himself a very promising apprentice. Another evening, he wandered into the royal kitchen, dipped a spoon into a pot of stew, and knighted it. Sir Brothsworth. The royal sleep watch was formed to manage the chaos. Their duties included gently guiding the king away from staircases chandeliers, and ceremonial fountains, whispering, "This way, your majesty," while holding a velvet rope like a bedtime parade marshal, documenting his nocturnal proclamations, which included, "Let all ducks be tax exempt," and "I hereby ban itchy socks." Queen Melisande, ever patient, installed plush carpets throughout the palace to soften his midnight journeys. She also placed scented breadcrumbs to guide him back to bed. One night, he followed the trail into the royal pantry and slept inside a barrel of pickles. The court physician diagnosed him with somnambulus majesticus, a condition marked by regal sleepwalking and occasional declarations of love to furniture. Remedies included sleeping with a cabbage under the pillow for grounding, wearing slippers filled with sand for traction, being gently redirected with a feather duster and a soothing chant. Despite the confusion, the king's sleepwalks were oddly productive. He once reorganized the royal archives, invented a new dance called the drowsy waltz, and accidentally signed a treaty with a visiting ambassador who mistook the whole thing for a ceremony. In the medieval court, naps weren't just a luxury, they were a strategic necessity, and kings and queens didn't simply doze off when tired. They followed elaborate nap schedules that rivaled military campaigns in complexity. King Oswald, the Unhurried of Mercia, had his day divided into 7 official nap slots. The dawn doze, taken immediately after breakfast, ideally while still chewing; the mid-morning muddle, a brief nap in the throne room, often mistaken for deep thought; the pre-lunch ponder, taken while staring at a roast pheasant and wondering about destiny; the post-pudding plunge, the most sacred nap, accompanied by harp music and a blanket embroidered with clouds; the afternoon ambivalence, a nap taken while pretending to read royal decrees; the twilight tumble, often on a balcony, occasionally mistaken for fainting; and the pre-bedtime blink, a nap before sleep, just to warm up. Queen Mildred of Kent had her own system. She napped whenever a bell rang, which was unfortunate because the palace had 42 bells, including one that rang every time someone sneezed. She once napped 17 times in a single day and woke up convinced she'd traveled through time. Royal nap schedules were so important that entire roles were created to support them. The nap herald announced each nap with a trumpet and a whisper. The pillow knight carried the royal cushion and defended it from dust, and the blanket chancellor ensured optimal tuckage and temperature regulation. Nap diplomacy was real too. King Alphonse of Castile once delayed a treaty signing because it clashed with his scheduled siesta of sovereignty, and the treaty was signed later, with both parties yawning and slightly drooling. Of course, not all naps went smoothly. King Rupert of Saxony once napped during a coronation, his own, so the crown was placed on his head while he snored, and he awoke thinking he'd won a raffle. So tonight, as you consider your own sleep schedule, remember that a well-timed nap is the mark of true nobility. Whether it's a dawn doze or a pre-bedtime blink, embrace your inner monarch and snooze with pride. Nap often, nap boldly, and always appoint a pillow knight. The royal palace of Somnaria was quiet. The tapestries had stopped whispering. The fountains had slowed to a sleepy trickle. Even the royal pigeons had tucked their heads beneath their wings. It was time for the final yawn. King Percival the Peaceful stood on his balcony, wrapped in a blanket embroidered with moons, stars, and one confused-looking badger. He gazed at the sleepy kingdom below and sighed, a long, regal sigh that echoed softly through the valley. This was tradition. Every night, the monarch would issue the final yawn, a ceremonial exhale that signaled bedtime for all. Peasants paused their lullabies. Nobles lowered their monocles. Even the royal jester stopped juggling invisible pineapples. Queen Arabella joined him, holding Sir Pricklebottom, the stuffed hedgehog. "Ready?" she whispered. Percival nodded. Together, they inhaled and released the yawn heard round the realm. It was majestic. It was gentle. It was slightly squeaky. The royal yawn bell rang once. The sleepy scroll was rolled up, and the royal snore guard took their posts, armed with feather dusters and bedtime poetry. Tonight's lullaby was sung by a choir of owls. The lyrics included, "Sleep now, O crowned and crumb-covered heads, dream of dragons, ducks, and royal beds." The king retired to his chamber, where his bed was warmed by a fire and flanked by 2 snoring footmen. He climbed in, adjusted his nightcap, and whispered to the stars, "Let the kingdom rest." And it did. From the highest tower to the humblest hayloft, Somnaria slept. Dreams danced, blankets curled, and somewhere, a hedgehog in a cape smiled. Thank you for joining me on this royally ridiculous bedtime journey. May your dreams be noble, your snores be gentle, and your nightcap never slip. Good night.